super blessed to be able to hear Matthew. I'm nearly said for the last time. I really hope it's not for the last time. For those of you who don't know, Matthew's a senior journalist editor for the Sunday Times, and but no more. He's taken up a position in London, and he's leaving in 2 weeks' time, and then he'll be back in a month or a couple of months to pick up a family. But Matthew, we have been so blessed to have you share your sermons over the years. Of course, you know, Matthew's also a graduate of Southern Bible School, he knows the Word. I mean, God has gifted him with the ability to speak to people. And we're really going to miss it. Hopefully we'll be able to hook up with Zoom and we'll be able to do some things. But we certainly look forward to hearing what Matthew's going to do with the church over there. So, Matthew, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to be with you. I'm going to be here next week. When Brian sent me a message and asked me which Sunday would I like to speak, I said definitely not my last one. I'd probably not make it through. This morning I want to talk about influence. And there are a couple of examples I want to share with you about influence and about how easy it is to influence. Because sometimes we hear this idea of us being influencers, we hear about this idea of us going out and preaching the word and making disciples, and it becomes a bit overwhelming or a bit daunting. How do I do it? How do I start? How do I become these influencers that we are called to be? So I'm going to share just a couple of personal examples with you, and then I'm going to share two very quick stories out of the Gospel of John, Gospel according to John, that just speak to exactly how two people from completely different walks of life in completely different circumstances proved to be incredibly influential. And that's what I wanted to take from this morning, is just three things, two things that don't matter and one thing that does. That's all I want to talk about this morning. I'm going to leave you with three key takeaways. And I've had a few opportunities to speak to this congregation before. If you have learned my preaching style, I'm probably the king of introductions. I love introductions. My introductions are probably about 80% of what I'm going to say, and then I spend the last 20% getting to what I want to say, and then I go. So it's exactly no change today. Why change everything now? So we're going to have an extremely long introduction, quickly delve into two passages in John, and then I'll leave you with the three takeaways this morning. And I want to start this morning just by talking about this idea of an influencer. Now, if you are probably my age-ish and younger, late 30s, younger, you'll get this idea of an influencer. You would have come across this term of an influencer. Now, if you're slightly older than me, you might not know what this means. This is basically people who get paid truckloads of money to tell people what to spend their money on. That's basically what an influencer is. And it's become a profession. You can actually be a full-time influencer. There are kids who are going to become full-time YouTubers. You can now be a full-time, that can be your job. You can be a person who talks nonsense on the internet and make decent amount of money for it. And when I say decent amounts of money, I'm not exaggerating. The most, or the highest paid celebrity influencer is Kim Kardashian. She gets paid $500,000 per post. $500,000 for one post on Instagram. So forget her other businesses and forget the incredible work that she is doing in terms of helping people get out of prison, people who've been incorrectly incarcerated. Let's not only look at her as this, this celebrity from Keeping Up with the Kardashians. She's now trained as a lawyer and she's helping people get out of prison who've been wrongly imprisoned. She's doing incredible stuff, but she makes the bulk of her money by posting things on Instagram, and she'll make $500,000 per post. She's a full-time influencer. Now, there are other influencers who are non-celebrity influencers. I didn't bother with their names. I've never heard of them, which shows how out of touch I am. But there are probably people in this congregation who would have. There are a couple of influencers that will get $90,000, $95,000 a post. That's just a normal person on Instagram. The highest paid, or the South African who is on the highest paid South African on YouTube. He now has two homes, one in Camps Bay, one in London, and he bounces between the two. He only lives in summer. I think his name is Casper. He started as a He started as someone who was feeling a bit alienated. He was in a small dorpie in the middle of nowhere, and he went onto YouTube and just spoke about his struggles of living in a conservative Afrikaans culture and how it made him feel a bit alienated from everything else that was going on around him. And he is now a multimillionaire in pounds and rand and flits between Camps Bay and a flat in London which overlooks the Thames. And that's now a full-time job of being an influencer. But what I want to tell you this morning is that we are called to be influencers. The problem is that in our influencing, we don't get dollars for it. The good news is that we get something way better for it. And we get things way better on two levels. We get things way better on two levels because we get rewarded for our influence from the person that we are asked to influence for. And that reward is eternity in heaven with the person whose product we are meant to be talking about. And the second benefit to being the influencers that we are called to be is that we are giving other people access to that reward. Now, for me, that one sounds almost more beneficial than the first. It's all great to have a personal reward, but how much better to bring other people into that reward? There's a double benefit for it. But how does influencing work? How do you become an influencer? I'll give you a couple of really, really simple, straightforward examples. I use the same dentist as Matthew Blackburn does. Because he had a good experience with that dentist, I said, I need dental work done. He said, go to this guy's brilliant. I now spend my money with that dentist. How many times in your life have you said to a friend, I need a thing with a car. Oh, go to my guy. I've got a guy. Go to this person. They'll be able to tell you about it. I am at this congregation because 13 or so years ago, I thought there was a particular girl who was quite pretty, and it turned out that she would become my wife. Up until that point, I was a member at the Pinetown congregation. 13 years ago, I went where she went because, have you seen her? Of course I did. I was positively influenced by someone who 13 years later put me here today. In fact, one of the only reasons that I'm probably speaking to you today is because of Ben Lambert. I don't know if you know the Lambert family out of Umtata and East London in the Eastern Cape. I was very unsure what to do with my life after matric. I had pretty much tentatively planned to go do a gap year in London because I had no idea what to do with my life. Ben was a student at the South African Bible College in Benoni. He came back to Umtata to pack up his stuff, and he was like, why don't you come to SABS? And I went, okay. Why not? So I went to the South African Bible College in Benoni probably because Ben peer pressured me. Because I felt like I couldn't say no to him, because if you ever met Ben, it's almost impossible to say no to Ben. Of course it's impossible to say no to Ben. Ben's one of the most charming people you'll ever meet. When Ben says go to Bible college, you go to Bible college. Of course you do. That was in 2003. 20 years later, I have been able to, in that year I spent at the college, to build up knowledge and to build up information and to have a whole bunch of files and a whole bunch of people that I got to influence who influenced me. And if it wasn't for that exchange with Ben and that year at college and ultimately being in a relationship with Megan, I probably wouldn't be here today. Who knows how my life would have ended? And that's how influence works. It's a personal connection that builds and snowballs into something better. The job that I'm taking up in 2 weeks' time came because a friend of mine got a promotion and said, hey, you might be quite good at this. Do you want to give it a go? If I refer you, you'll get an interview. That was in October last year. I leave in 10 days. Because of an exchange that happened, some people believe in fate, other people believe in God's hand pushing you in certain directions. And that's how influence works. It's a personal connection that grows and builds into something else. But there's a dark side of influencing. And I'm not going to talk about that this morning. I don't want to go into the negative side of influence. I just want to make one quick reference to it, and then I'm going to push to the positives, because I think that's the best way to do it today. There is a scandal going on at the moment called Hello Darlings. I don't know if you've heard of the Hello Darlings scandal or seen it in the news. It's played out quite extensively. News 24 has done a lot of good stuff on it if you want to search and see some of the stuff they've done. But this is a woman who ran a business, and she offered extremely cheap holidays. But impossibly cheap holidays. If it's too good to be true holidays of those. And effectively what she was doing is she was taking in money for upfront trips to pay for the trips that were coming next. And if one or two people defaulted, then the whole scheme kind of collapsed. And she gave free holidays to influencers. She gave free holidays to people with loads of Twitter followers, flew people in from overseas to do these South African holidays, and flew people to Turkey for free, basically, to promote this thing on Instagram, and kind of moved everything around. And it now turns out that the company's completely gone bankrupt, and there are currently the last I checked, there were 37 million rand in fraud claims lodged against her. And this is because of an influencer scheme that went badly. So I just want to say it because it has to be said. There is good influence and there is bad influence. And both exist in equal measure. It's entirely possible that two things can exist at the same time. Good influence and bad influence can exist at the same time. There's a reason that the very first verse in Psalm is one that speaks about the dangers of being negatively influenced. Now, Psalm is obviously an incredible book, and the Psalms contained in there are filled with wisdom, but this is how it starts. Psalm 1 and verse 1 says, "Blessed is the one who does not walk in the step of the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers." It is an incredibly powerful passage that speaks of something called negative progression. That's when you, instead of moving forward, you move backwards. And look how it starts. It says, "Blessed is the one who does not walk," so that's movement. Then stand, so now your movement has stopped. And then sit, now you're entrenched. See, that's the thing. When we get involved in negative influence, that's often how it starts. You kind of walk alongside it. You kind of, oh, this isn't so bad. It's not too bad. The next thing you find yourself standing in it, and then the next thing you find yourself being immersed in it. And that's why Psalm starts in this way. It is a warning of negative influence. I just wanted to put that in. Negative influence exists. Be careful of the negative influences in your lives and in the environments that you find yourself in. Now let's park negatives. Let's talk positives. That's where we really want to be this morning. Turn with me, if you will, to John chapter 4. If you have your Bibles in front of you, if you have your apps, if you have whatever open. I don't have a PowerPoint this morning. Rory's going to be moving extremely quickly to see if he can keep up with me. Rory, good news. I'm not bouncing around a lot. We should be okay. I'll just pull up a couple of verses for you that I want to share. Please, if you can, read John 4 and John 5, if you can, in the course of the week. I think it will add a little bit to this morning. I'm going to talk about two stories, and the first story is about the woman at the well, and the second story is about the disabled man at the pool. And I'll talk about both of these stories. So let's start with the first one. It's in John chapter 4, and it's a really incredible passage. And it's one we know quite well. We've heard it quite well, so I'll skim through the details. But please read through it in the week if you get the chance. So basically, there is Jesus is on his way on a journey. He gets to a well, and he's tired, so he sits down at the well. It's the middle of the day, so it's hot. We need to remember that Jesus lived and operated in the Middle East. It was hot. This is Durban summer on steroids. This is proper. Middle of the day, heat of the day, he's on a journey, most of it on foot, gets to this well, sitting down, wants a drink, a woman walks up. Now, what makes this unusual to begin with is that you don't draw water from a well in the middle of the day. One, it's just too hot. You're carrying, I don't know how big their containers were, 5 liters, 10 liters of water, I'm not sure. The water's probably warm because it's been out in the sun all day. The only reason that you went to the well in the middle of the day is that you couldn't go in the morning or in the evening. And there are only a couple of reasons that you couldn't go in the morning or the evening. Maybe something happened at home, you couldn't get there in time, or whatever the case might be. As we read through the story, we realize the reason that she couldn't get to the well in the middle of the day, because this was a woman who was shunned by her own community. She couldn't gather with the other woman at the well in the morning or in the evening. She had to go in the middle of the day because if she didn't, things were just a little bit awkward. Now, we find out why things got a little bit awkward. It's the Samaritan woman at the well. Jesus gets to the well and says, can you get me something to drink? And she says, I'm just a Samaritan, you're a Jew, I can't get you water. Again, a little bit of context we need to understand here. The Samaritans were incredibly looked down on. They were considered a mixed race, a half-breed. There are definite racial undertones when you read the story about the Samaritans. They were basically during the Assyrian captivity in the Old Testament, and there was a lot of interbreeding. between the Assyrians and this Jewish sect. And so they were Jews, but they were Samaritan Jews, and it's just a little bit awkward, and there's a lot of underlying tensions that exist in these two communities, and the Jews did not associate with the Samaritans. That's what makes the story of the Good Samaritan. What makes that story even more powerful is it wasn't just someone helped the man who had been beaten, a Samaritan helped the man who'd been beaten. When the Jews heard that story, they would have gone, oh, that's even worse. Okay, now we're really bad. That's kind of the Samaritan context. So Jesus says, I'm the living water. That's where this passage comes up. He says, if you get me something to drink, she says, I'm the living water. She says, where can I get this living water? She says, I'm speaking to the living water. They have this whole incredible conversation about where to worship and where, you worship in Jerusalem, and then Jesus says it doesn't matter where you worship. He delivers these incredible truths, and in the middle of all of that, he says, go get your husband and come back. And she says, I have no husband. And he says, that's right, you have no husband. In fact, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you're with at the moment isn't one of those 5. And she kind of looks and goes, how did you know that? We've just met. So you have this whole situation played out. You've got this woman who's potentially a sex worker. We're not entirely sure of her background, but we certainly know she's a multiple divorcee. And if you know anything about the Jewish culture, that divorce was an incredibly shunning thing to happen, particularly to women, to the husbands as well, but was particularly bad in how women were affected by it. And Jesus has this powerful conversation with her. But then he has this conversation, and something even more powerful happens. And I want to pick it up. Roy, if you want to go with me, we're going to be in John chapter 4 and verse 39 to 42. Just 3 verses if you want to go, if you want to read this passage with me. And please, if you can, have a look at the whole passage in the course of the week. She has this experience with Jesus. Jesus explains this incredible universal truth about himself, about worship, about faith, about who his God is. They have this incredible conversation. She then goes off. We don't know what happens. Other conversations happen in between. In fact, the few verses before verse 39, that's when Jesus tells his disciples that I am the bread of life. So he reveals himself as the living water to this Samaritan outcast at the well before he delivers the truth about himself being the bread of life to his followers. What access has she just had to Christ that others haven't at this point in his ministry? She goes off. Verse 39, many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him, that's Jesus, because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I ever did, she said. So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed 2 days, and because of his words, many more became believers. They said to the woman, we no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves, and we know that the man really is the Savior of the world. Let's park that for a bit. Let's go to the second story. We'll come back to what happened in those few interleading verses. The second story is in John chapter 5. It's a disabled man at the pool. Now there was this pool, Bethesda, that was believed to have mythical, supernatural powers, healing powers. Now there could be elements of truth to it. If it was a sulfur pool, it is known that sulfur can have potentially good, can help with certain things. It is very possible that there was some kind of potentially beneficial reason for dipping into this pool. But basically how it worked is this pool would come in, and people would dip themselves in it in the hope of getting well, and people believed that it had some kind of power to do that. And this disabled man was one of those people. The problem is the pool could not fit an unlimited amount of people. And being disabled, and we can only assume that his disability affects his movement, because when he has this conversation with Jesus, Jesus says, do you need help? And he says, there's no one here to help me. So we assume that he cannot help himself into the pool, or he cannot help himself in fast enough. So you presume some kind of mobility-related disability. We found out in the story that he'd been disabled for 37 years, so he'd been disabled for 4 decades of his life. Jesus says to the man, do you want to get well? The man replies, sir, I have no one to help me. Jesus then immediately helps him and heals him, and the man gets up and walks away. Again, read the passage if you can in the week. It goes into a lot more detail, and it is a really, really powerful passage. And in John 5, verse 15 is where it's really, really, a really interesting verse. That John chapter 5 and verse 15 says, "The man went away and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had made him well." Now, we don't know exactly what happens here. There is no context between him being healed and him telling the Jewish leaders what had happened. What we do know is it happened on the Sabbath. So it was quite a controversial thing. Healing on the Sabbath is a big thing. Jesus does it a few times. Jesus gets criticized a lot for it. This whole back and forwards about healing on the Sabbath, it's a big thing. We don't know if the Jewish leaders had questioned him. We don't know if his friends had gone, what happened? Imagine you've known someone for 40 years and that person has been physically disabled for 40 years, and then next thing they're walking up to the shop next to you and they're buying something. I don't know if it reminded me almost when I read this, that iconic scene in Forrest Gump when Forrest is getting married to Jenny at the end, and Lieutenant Dan, who lost his legs in the Vietnam War, walks up and he's walking on his legs, and Forrest Gump looks at him and says, "Lieutenant Dan, you got new legs?" It kind of reminded me of that. Like, people must have gone, "That's what?" So and then the natural question is, what happened? And presumably the man would have told people about it. Or it's entirely possible, and we don't know this, that the man was a snitch. He might very well have gone to the Jewish leaders and said, "That man made me better. It was Jesus. He did it on the Sabbath. I mean, I'm glad, but he did the wrong thing." We don't know what happened. What we do know is that a man had a personal interaction with Jesus and went and told other people about it, in the same way that the woman at the well did. Had a personal interaction and went and told other people. We do know the end result of what happened with the man at the pool, with the man at Bethesda. We know that it results in the Jewish leaders coming to Jesus and questioning him and saying, "What are you doing? It's a Sabbath." Having this whole fight with him. You're effectively demon-possessed. Like, it's this whole kind of weird thing. It happens. There's another incredible healing that happens in John chapter 8, 9, and it plays out into chapter 10. And Jesus goes, "Let me tell you something. Let me tell you a little bit about myself." And we're going to pull these up very quickly if you can. The first one is in verse 17. So John chapter 5 and verse 17. I'm just going to pull 3 quick verses of what Jesus says about himself, and then we'll get to the point of what I want to say. I did warn you that this was going to be a long introduction. I did warn you. Okay, verse 17 of John chapter 5. Jesus says, "My Father is always at his work to this very day. I too am working." Jesus is now starting to build this relationship between him and God up. He's starting now to beef it all up. Verse 24, if you want to pull it up very quickly. "Whoever hears my word and believes in him who sent me has eternal life." And then in verse 36, "The works my Father has given me to finish, the very works that I am doing, testify that the Father has sent me." Because of what happened to this man and the end result of him talking to other people, Jesus reveals incredible truths about himself, about his work, and about his relationship with God. Jesus is basically saying, "I am God, God is me, I'm doing God's work. This is the relationship that we have." And we read in that passage that as a result, the Jews want to kill him. Because of course they do. Because what he is saying is incredibly, incredibly blasphemous under the Jewish law. But as we read through the New Testament, we see that Jesus is revealing incredible truths about himself. So what do we learn from these 2 passages? These 2 different people with only 2 things in common that involved water and involved an encounter with Jesus. Now, I'm not saying in any way that the water is done deliberately and it's some kind of hidden message around baptism, but I also don't believe that anything in the New Testament is coincidental. And I think that there is a reason that water is involved in this. If you read up about baptism and the importance of baptism and immersing yourself in Christ's death through baptism, I think there's a good reason why water plays such a big role right throughout Jesus' mission and beyond that. So what do we learn from this? 2 things that don't matter, 1 thing that matters, and then the lesson will be yours this morning. The first lesson that we take from this is when you want to be an influencer for Christ, when you want to do the Matthew chapter 28 Great Commission of going into the world and making disciples, this great task that when we look at it seems so daunting and overwhelming, and how am I supposed to fulfill that? The first thing is it doesn't matter who you are. It really does not matter who you are. Do not think that you are too insignificant. Do not think that you are too unimportant. Do not think that you cannot be the influencer that Christ has called you to be. It does not matter who you are. We are all different. We all have different strengths and different weaknesses. We all have things that work for us. We all have things that work against us. We have different personality types, and that's all fine. We are all called to do the work, but it does not have to be the same work. We don't know whether or not we know that the woman at the well went out and told people about this amazing thing Jesus has done. We don't know what happened with the man at the pool. But we do know the end result is they spoke about Jesus. In these two particular stories, you've got a man who would have been a social outcast because of his disability, who felt his only way to getting healed was to jump in this mythical pool. And when Jesus says, "Do you need help?" he says, "There's no one here to help me." There's a man who didn't even have enough friends who could put him into a pool. He was an outcast. You've got the Samaritan woman who was an outcast not just because of her mixed race heritage, but because of her own personal interactions and perhaps her work as a sex worker, or at least as a person who hops from one relationship to the next. Social outcasts who went and did incredible things. Before leading the people out of Egypt, an Egyptian was murdered. David sinned with Bathsheba. Samson allowed Delilah to cut his hair because he felt, see, the people of God aren't perfect. It doesn't matter that we aren't perfect. It doesn't matter who you are. The second thing that doesn't matter is it doesn't matter what you've done. There are too many people in the church and outside the church who believe that they've done too many things too bad, God won't accept me. I've done too many things too bad, I can't do God's work. What about that thing I did when I was a teenager? What about what about the horrible thing that I did? What about the horrible person that I was? It does not matter. The thing is, our pasts will always have a consequence, but there is no need to be held to those pasts. It doesn't matter what you have done. The woman at the well is the absolute perfect example of this. Her background was tainted. She was an outcast on so many levels. But an entire town invited Jesus to stay for 2 days. An entire town believed that Jesus was the Savior of the world because of a tainted woman's, I want to say testimony, but it feels bigger than that. It's because of a tainted woman's personal experience with Jesus. A whole town believed. See, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you have done. Every single one of us sitting here today has had a personal experience with Christ. And your personal experience might be the fact that your parents and grandparents and their parents were members of the church. That's fine. It might be because you're going through or went through something traumatic and someone helped you. I was on a path that was not ideal until my dad passed away. And that brought me into sharp focus. If it wasn't for Ben Lambert, I don't know if I would have been where I was. If I was still at the Pinetown congregation, I don't know if I would have been where I am now if it wasn't for Megan. See, we have these personal interactions with Christ or with the people of Christ that lead us in certain ways. And we need to be doing the same for those around us. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you've done. What does matter, the only thing that matters, is that you point people to Christ. And that could be because you are so excited that you just can't help it, and you get people like that. I think of Michiel when I think of this example. I've never met anyone like Michiel who will actively go out and speak to as many people as he possibly can, irrespective of the circumstance. And that is great. That's not me. That might not be you. This is me. I like this. That personal one-on-one thing is something I struggle with. I'm not a big fan of small talk. I don't know how to transition from, hello, how are you? Have you met Jesus? I'm not good at how to get there. Some people are. All that matters is that in whatever way you do it, you point people to him. Ever found that being a Christian, how often when there's a crisis at work or something like that, people come to you? Ever noticed that? Isn't it quite weird? I'm always the go-to person. Oh, it's so irritating. Whenever everyone comes to me. Well, why not? Why not use what might be an irritation into something good. See, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what you've done. All that matters is that you use your personal interaction with Jesus to point people to him. We're all called to be influencers. We're all called to share our experiences with other people because the reward is too great not to. And it's not just a personal reward, it is a collective reward. There are people in our lives who we can see bad things happening to, and we have the potential to influence them positively. There are people going through things, we have the potential to influence them positively, and we need to be doing that. Those are the three things I wanted to leave you with this morning. And just to say, it's not so much about where we are or where we've been. What's really important is about where we're going and what influence we take with us wherever and whatever situations that might be.